Hello, my name is Adam Peoples, and I wrote my second research paper on the topic of regulation of social media platforms and personal responsibility. An introduction. Debates have taken place regarding if and how free speech should be regulated on social media. Social media platforms must have regulations to ensure a pleasant user experience. Social media platforms are not protected by the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment and do not have to allow free speech. I'll get into more detail about that in the next slide. Online consequences for offensive speech are typically limited. They can come in the forms of bans or suspensions, typically not legal action. However, societal consequences can be much more severe. I'll now talk about the First Amendment and its role in social media companies. In the United States, the First Amendment to the Constitution prevents the government from creating laws prohibiting the use of free speech. This is not the same as private entities such as Facebook or Twitter creating and enforcing rules on their own platforms. Companies like Facebook and Twitter are perfectly allowed to say what they want and do not want on their platforms, and they are allowed to ban or suspend users who do not comply. Facebook and Twitter are free to define hate speech as they wish, and there's nothing illegal about them doing so, as they are not the government. Essentially, social networks can restrict speech as they please, while the U.S. government must allow free speech in public settings. These are private entities, and they can set the rules as they please. I'll now start to talk about the consequences of using offensive speech on social media. Online versus societal consequences. Online consequences, as I've previously mentioned, are typically pretty limited. Bans or suspensions. Societal consequences, these are just several examples which I will discuss in greater detail shortly, include job loss, suspension from a university, or loss of an internship. As you can see, these are significantly more drastic, and they all stem from something somebody says on the internet. The online consequences. Because of their limited legal power, social media companies typically cannot take legal action regarding offensive speech being posted, as at least in the United States, it is not illegal to use offensive speech. It may be morally reprehensible or not socially acceptable. However, there is nothing preventing it from happening legally, to my knowledge and to my research. As such, the typical consequences of posting offensive content on a social network is a ban or suspension. People get their accounts removed from Facebook or Twitter. And that's the worst case scenario typically. They're not going to come after you for saying something that is morally reprehensible. The societal consequences for offensive speech or actions can vary and are often devastating. That is the next topic I would like to get into. I'll provide several examples of the effects of social media on society. Example number 1. This is a story reported by the news outlet Forbes in 2013. A woman by the name of Justine Sacco, a communications executive for a company known as IAC, they're a news media company that runs a lot of American media, tweeted a distasteful statement regarding Africans, Africa, and the AIDS illness. She poked humor at taking a trip to Africa and made fun of sufferers of the AIDS illness as well as African citizens. She thought it was humorous at the time. This is careless and it was distasteful. The public backlash was unreal. There was significant outcry. People were unhappy. And at the time she really did not understand it. But anyways, the major effect of this was the inevitable removal from her position. She was fired from her job. In addition to the practical public shunning, which will make it difficult for her to seek employment in the future in the field of journalism. Attached at the bottom right is a picture of Justine Sacco I found while I was performing research. This is just one instance of something somebody says on the internet drastically changing their life, and society holding a person responsible for what they say or do. I'll now go into a second example. I don't have an image for this one as I was unable to find anything relevant. However, this was reported by the Canadian news outlet Global News in 2015. There's a Facebook group containing 13 dentistry students posted derogatory comments about women to Facebook. These degrading comments were seen by university staff and resulted in a suspension from Dalhousie University. I'm unsure of the pronunciation. I apologize if that is inaccurate. They were suspended for posting their comments. They didn't think that what they said would get out of the group whatsoever. Their lack of consideration regarding what they posted and the potential consequences of their actions resulted in very significant consequences for them. They were placed on suspension, and they will now be looked into with greater scrutiny by the public as well as potentially by the university. This could cause potential problems for them in the future, especially within something like the dentistry field, as members of this profession are generally held to a relatively high moral standard. So performing an act that is such morally reprehensible, such as posting rude comments, while not necessarily a legal issue, definitely something that the public would not approve of. I'll now go into a third example. This is a much more recent example reported by news outlet Daily Mail in 2018. This is one I actually followed on social media myself as it happened. At the time, I will admit that hearing this happen I had felt that it was satire. I did not believe that it was a real event. I was disheartened to find out that this is a real event that happened. It involves a 21-year-old woman by the name of Naomi H. At least that is what she went by on Twitter. She was accepted into an internship position from NASA. She used vulgar language in a post celebrating her acceptance. She got a response stating the word language from a Twitter user named Homer Hickam. She responded with more vulgar language, telling him off and speaking negatively regarding him, belittling him. What she did not realize is that Homer Hickam is a member of the National Space Council that oversees NASA and oversees the NASA internship programs. This resulted in a loss of her internship position. Hickam himself actually published a statement saying that his intent was never to remove her from her position. His intent was simply to warn her against using offensive language and to tell her that it basically wasn't a good idea. Unfortunately, this resulted in other employees involved in the NSC and involved in NASA overhearing this, and unfortunately she lost her internship position. As you can see, something she thought was humorous at the time, something that she thought was in good-spirited fun nature, resulted in a very life-altering consequence for her. This NASA internship could have provided her more promising opportunities in the future. However, due to insensitive Twitter posts and careless thought, society once again held her accountable for her actions. I will now discuss all of this in a conclusion. Internet users, while they are allowed to speak freely, websites are allowed to restrict speech as they choose. As I've stated several times, online consequences are typically limited to a ban or suspension, as social media companies have no legal ground for arresting someone for stating something offensive or speaking derogatory towards a group. Societal consequences, however, can be drastic and life-altering. I feel that members of society should be held accountable for their words and for their actions, regardless of the medium used to express their words or perform their actions. I feel that if a person would have said some of the things that I had mentioned to another person in society, in real life, they would have experienced the same consequences, and I feel that's fair. I don't feel that people should be allowed to hide behind their cell phones or behind computer screens. I feel that it's the same person behind the screen as it is in front of the screen, and personal responsibility should take precedence in terms of what people post on social media. I feel that it is not necessarily the job of the social media companies to, quote, regulate their platform. It is the job of society to hold other members of society accountable for the things that they say. Regardless of positive or negative consequences, I feel that should be incentive enough for users to not use offensive speech because of what can be faced by them, as we've seen here: job loss, university suspension, and loss of a valuable internship. To sum it up, social media users should take greater consideration to what they post, and social media companies should not be forced to act as a police and regulator of all content. People should be allowed to state their opinions on the internet, however, deal with the consequences of the things that they state. That is all I have.
We end the recording.